Some people don't stop loving someone because the feeling fades. They stop because waiting in silence with no explanation and no goodbye eventually teaches you that you have to. Isabella had learned that lesson well. She'd packed it away neatly alongside the memory of a boy who used to sit on her porch and teach her chess, who knew how she took her coffee before she did, who disappeared one day without a word, and left her with a list of reasons she must have done something wrong. She'd built a life without him. A careful, functional, quietly lonely life. And then at 11:47 on a Wednesday night, her phone buzzed with a message from a number she'd never deleted. "I'm going to marry you." He thought he was drunk. He thought it was a mistake. He thought it was a joke. She didn't think. This is the beginning of everything. But some people spend years becoming who they need to be, before they can come back to who they've always belonged with. This is a story about a woman who stopped waiting, and the man who never stopped trying to deserve her. A simple like helps this channel more than you know. So thank you for your support. I'm always curious to see where my listeners are from. Please drop a comment and share your location so I can see how far this story has traveled. Don't forget to subscribe, and now let's get back to the story. The night had that particular stillness that only comes after 10 o'clock in Texas, when the heat finally loosens its grip, and the air outside turns almost tolerable. Isabella Reyes stood in her bathroom in an oversized sleep shirt, running a brush through her hair, with the mechanical efficiency of someone doing something for the 10,000th time. The mirror gave her back a face she recognized. A little tired, a little careful, fine. She was fine. She'd been fine for 6 months now, which was approximately how long it had been since Damien had come home on a Tuesday evening, set his keys on the counter with unusual care, and said, "I met someone at work. I'm sorry. I'll be out by the weekend." He had been out by Friday. She had cried for 2 weeks and then stopped, because crying didn't change anything, and she had a classroom of 23 third graders who needed her to be present on Monday mornings. She'd packed up the half of the apartment that was hers, which turned out to be most of it, she'd noticed, with something between satisfaction and grief, and she'd reorganized the bookshelves and called her mother and gone back to work. Fine was a choice. She'd made it deliberately, the way you make all the choices that keep you functional. Her phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. She didn't look at it immediately. It was probably her friend Carla sending a meme, or her mother forwarding something about the benefits of magnesium, or a notification from an app she kept forgetting to delete. She finished with the brush, tied her hair back, and picked up the phone. The name on the screen stopped her cold. Mark Calloway. For a moment she just stood there, brush still in her hand, looking at his name like it was something that had materialized out of thin air, which, in a sense, it had. She hadn't deleted the number. She'd thought about it in those early months after he'd gone quiet, and then later she'd simply stopped thinking about it. The number existed in her phone the way certain memories exist in the mind. Present, untouched, unexamined. She opened the message. "I'm going to marry you." Isabella read it twice. Then a third time. Then she set the phone face down on the counter and looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. Her first thought was that he was drunk. Her second thought was that it was a mistake. A message meant for someone else sent to the wrong contact, because people did that, phones did that. Her third thought was that it was a joke. A terrible, poorly timed, not remotely funny joke. She picked the phone back up and looked at the message again. 4 words. No context, no punctuation, no preceding hey or long time no see or any of the social scaffolding that a normal human being would use before making a statement like that. Just, "I'm going to marry you." Delivered at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, from a number she hadn't used in nearly 10 years. She put the phone on the nightstand, got into bed, and turned off the light. She did not sleep for a very long time. She'd known Mark Calloway since she was 7 years old. He'd moved into the house 2 doors down in the summer before 2nd grade. A quiet, watchful boy with secondhand sneakers and eyes that took in everything. Her mother had sent Isabella over with a plate of empanadas, because that's what her mother did when new people arrived, and Isabella had stood on his front porch holding the plate, while he looked at her with that unreadable expression and then said without any greeting at all, "Do you know how to play chess?" He didn't. He taught her. They played every afternoon for the rest of the summer, sitting cross-legged on his front porch because his mother didn't like people in the house. And by September they were inseparable in the way that children become inseparable when they've decided, without quite knowing it, that this person makes the world feel safer. The house 2 doors down was not a happy place. Isabella understood this gradually, the way children understand things, through accumulation of small details rather than any single revelation. Mark's father worked long hours and came home tight-faced and silent. His mother moved through the rooms like she was waiting for permission to exist. By the time they were in middle school, the arguments had become loud enough to hear from the sidewalk. And by sophomore year of high school, Mark's mother was gone. She left on a Thursday in February. Mark told Isabella about it on Friday morning, sitting on the bleachers before school, staring at the football field with his jaw set in that particular way he had when he was feeling something he refused to show. She hadn't known what to say, so she'd sat with him until the bell rang, and then walked to the first period beside him without speaking, because somehow she'd understood that words would be wrong. That presence was what he needed. Her parents had absorbed him quietly. Her father, a high school history teacher with a deep reverence for potential, had noticed Mark's intelligence early. The way he read voraciously, the way he asked questions that cut through to the center of things, the way he worked. When junior year arrived and the subject of college applications surfaced, it was her father who sat down with Mark at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a list of scholarship programs and said, "Let's figure out what you need." Stanford had felt like an impossible idea until it wasn't. Isabella had gone to UT Austin 40 minutes from home, studying education because she'd always known she would. Mark had driven away toward California in a car that barely made it to the state line, and they'd kept in touch the way people keep in touch when they care. Texts, calls that ran long visits when geography allowed. She'd watched him become someone different. Sharper, more confident, shedding the careful hunched quality he'd carried through adolescence, like armor he couldn't take off. After graduation they'd seen each other once. He'd come back to Austin for a week and something had shifted between them, something unnamed and slightly terrifying, that she'd chosen not to examine too closely, because examining it would have required courage she wasn't sure she had. And then he'd gone back to San Francisco and the messages had gotten shorter and the calls had stopped, and eventually she'd sent 3 unanswered texts over the course of 2 months and understood, with a quiet devastation that surprised her, that he was done. She told herself it was fine. She told herself a lot of things. She called Carla the next morning before school. "Mark Calloway sent me a message last night." Silence. Then, "Mark Calloway? You're Mark Calloway?" "He was never my Mark Calloway. Isabella. He was absolutely your Mark Calloway." "What did it say?" She repeated the 4 words. Another silence, longer this time. "He's drunk," Carla said. "That's what I thought. Or he pocket texted you. Doesn't he have a girlfriend? He's probably proposing to someone and he..." It was addressed to no one. "It just said I'm going to marry you." "Okay," Carla said slowly. "Okay, did you respond?" "No." "Are you going to?" Isabella watched a mockingbird land on her balcony railing and cock its head at her. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe. Well, I don't know." She didn't respond. She went to school and taught her 3rd graders about fractions and tried not to think about a boy sitting on bleachers with his jaw set, staring at a football field in February. She failed at the not thinking. He called the next afternoon. She was grading papers at her kitchen table when her phone lit up with the same number, and she stared at it for 4 full rings before she answered, because some part of her was still debating whether she wanted to have this conversation, and another part of her had already accepted that she did. "Isabella." His voice was different, deeper, steadier, carrying none of the careful tentativeness she remembered. This was not the voice of someone who wasn't sure of his welcome. "I wasn't sure you'd pick up." "I almost didn't," she said. It came out flatter than she intended. A brief pause. "That's fair." She waited. Outside someone was mowing a lawn. The ordinary world continued. "I'd like to take you to dinner," he said. "Saturday. Whatever restaurant you want. I'll be in Austin." She almost laughed. Not from amusement, but from the sheer audacity of the straight line from "I'm going to marry you" to "dinner Saturday," with no detour through "I'm sorry for disappearing from your life," or "I know this is strange," or "I don't blame you if you hang up on me." "Mark," she said. "I know. You sent me a message at midnight saying you were going to marry me." "I know. I haven't spoken to you in 9 years and 4 months, he said. "Give or take." She went quiet. The precision of it caught her off guard. The fact that he knew exactly how long it had been had apparently counted it, Carried that number around with him the way you carry something you haven't put down. Saturday, she said finally. It wasn't an agreement exactly. It wasn't quite a refusal either. I'll text you the details, he said. You can change the restaurant if you want. Or cancel. I'll understand. She didn't cancel. She told herself it was because she wanted answers. She told herself it was closure or curiosity, or the simple human desire to understand something that had never made sense. She got dressed Saturday evening in a green dress she'd bought herself after Damien left, a deliberate act of self-possession, and drove to the restaurant he'd suggested, a quiet place off South Congress that she knew and liked. She chose to interpret the fact that he'd suggested somewhere she knew and liked as research rather than coincidence, and she wasn't sure which of those possibilities was more unsettling. He was already there when she arrived. She saw him through the window before she walked in, and something moved in her chest that she immediately refused to acknowledge. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe it was just the way he held himself now, the comfortable ease of someone who had learned to take up his rightful space in a room. He was in a dark button-down, no tie, sleeves rolled up, reading something on his phone with his brow slightly furrowed. He looked up when she walked in. The slight furrow disappeared. You look exactly the same, he said, rising. Then reconsidering, that's not true. You look better. You look. He stopped. Hi. Despite everything, something tugged at the corner of her mouth. Hi, she said. They sat. The first 10 minutes were a negotiation. Careful small talk, the verbal equivalent of two people figuring out how to share a space they hadn't shared in a long time. He asked about her work, she asked about his. He'd built a software company from nothing. She'd followed the news through mutual acquaintances, heard the word Series B and acquisition offer he turned down, and 300 employees. But hearing him describe it was different from hearing about it. He talked about it without self-congratulation, with a directness that was clearly habitual. The food arrived and something loosened slightly. She asked about San Francisco. He asked about her parents. She told a story about her father and a disastrous attempt at home renovation. He laughed with his whole face the way he'd always laughed, and for a moment the 10 years collapsed to nothing, and they were two kids on a porch playing chess. Then the moment passed and she remembered why she was here. You haven't apologized, she said. He met her eyes. No. You're going to have to at some point. I know, he said. I'm going to. I just didn't want to do it in the first 5 minutes because it deserves more than 5 minutes. She looked at him across the table and thought, I don't know who you are anymore. And underneath that, something she was less willing to examine. I want to find out. She drove home alone and sat in her car in the parking garage for longer than was reasonable. Then she went inside and did not text Carla because she didn't know what she would say. 2 weeks later he asked if they could walk. Not dinner, not coffee, just walking, along the trail by the river on a Sunday morning when the city was still slow. It was on that walk that he told her everything. He started slowly, finding his footing the way you do when you're about to say something you've never said aloud before. She walked beside him and let him find it, and the river moved on their right, flat and brown in the morning light. I was 22, he said. I just graduated. I had a degree from Stanford and a job offer in San Francisco, and I was the most terrified I'd ever been in my life. He paused. Not of the job, of you. She looked at him. You grew up in a house where people showed up for each other, he said. Your parents went to your plays and helped your friends with their applications and made food for strangers and stayed married. That was your baseline. What normal looked like to you. He was quiet for a moment. My baseline was different. My baseline was my father's face on a Friday night, and my mother's car not being in the driveway anymore. I didn't know how to be in a relationship without eventually doing what they did. I thought it was in me somehow. In my blood. Isabella said nothing. He kept walking. I thought if I came back to you the way I was at 22 I'd ruin it. I'd ruin you. He said it without self-pity, stating a fact. So I told myself I'd come back when I was something. When I'd built something real and could stand next to you and not feel like I was the same kid in the secondhand sneakers, who needed your dad to help him fill out an application. Mark. I know, he said. I know how that sounds. I'm not telling you it was right. I'm telling you what I thought. He paused again. The problem is that while I was busy becoming someone I could stand behind, You were going through your life without your best friend, and I was watching from a distance because I kept following you on Instagram like the coward I was, and I saw when you got together with Damien and I thought, he stopped walking. I thought, she found someone. She's happy. Maybe I missed it. Maybe I was wrong about us all along. Isabella stopped too. They were standing on the bridge, the river underneath them, the city spreading out in both directions. And then you were engaged, he said. And I had exactly one terrible night where I thought about calling you and decided I had no right to. And then 8 months later I found out the engagement was off. He looked at her directly. I didn't feel happy about it. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't glad you were hurt. But I also would be lying if I said there wasn't a part of me that thought, one more chance. And I decided I wasn't going to waste it. So you sent me a text at midnight, she said, telling me you were going to marry me. I wanted to give you time to get used to the idea. That is the most, she stopped. Laughed, a short surprised sound. Stopped laughing. Do you have any idea how arrogant that is? Yes, he said simply. She looked at the river. You watched my life for 9 years. Yes. While I was wondering what I'd done wrong. Something in his face shifted. Isabella. I went over it, she said quietly. Every conversation we'd had. Every text message. I tried to figure out what I'd said or done that made you decide I wasn't worth keeping in your life. I came up with a list. She shook her head. It was a long list. You didn't do anything, he said. There was no list. The reason was entirely me. I know that now. She turned to look at him. But I spent months not knowing it. And that's not a small thing, Mark. That's not something I can just set aside because you've explained yourself. I'm not asking you to set it aside, he said. I'm asking you to let me be here while you figure out what to do with it. She looked at him for a long moment. The river moved. A kayaker passed underneath them. I haven't forgiven you, she said. I know. And I don't know if I will. I know that too. Then what exactly, she said, are you proposing? Just this, he said. Just being here. You can tell me to go to hell anytime you want. I won't disappear again. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she turned and started walking again, and after a beat he fell into step beside her, and they finished the loop in a silence that was somewhere between comfortable and charged, and she couldn't quite decide which unsettled her more. The conversation on the bridge unlocked something. Not trust, not quite, but the possibility of it. Like a door that had been stuck for years, suddenly finding its hinges again. He showed up. That was the only way she could describe it afterward to herself. Mark Calloway showed up. Not with grand gestures. With the small, specific, slightly maddening precision of someone who had paid attention for 9 years, and was now putting that attention to work. He texted on Tuesday mornings because that was when she had her most demanding class and usually came home depleted. Nothing that required a response. A link to something she'd find interesting, a photo of something he'd seen in the city, a line about his day that was actually funny. She started looking for the Tuesday texts. She didn't tell him this. He remembered without being reminded that she took her coffee with oat milk and exactly 1 sugar, that she hated cilantro, that she had a complicated relationship with her sister, that she would talk about sideways but never head-on. He didn't press. He just absorbed and stored and occasionally reflected back some small detail in a way that said, I heard you. Remember. One Saturday morning she came out of the grocery store to find him helping her father load lumber into his truck in the parking lot. She stopped on the sidewalk and watched them for a moment. Her father talking, hands moving, Mark nodding and lifting, the easy body language of 2 people who were comfortable with each other. Her father saw her and waved. Mark turned and smiled, and the uncomplicated warmth of it caught her somewhere undefended. Your dad's building a new bookcase, Mark explained when she reached them. I can see that, she said. I'm helping. I can see that too. Her father looked between them with the expression of a man who knew more than he was letting on, which was deeply irritating. You should come for dinner Sunday, he said to Mark. Elena's making enchiladas. I'd like that, Mark said. He glanced at Isabella. She looked back at him with what she hoped was neutrality. She went to Sunday dinner. So did Mark. Her mother greeted him with a hug as though he'd been gone for a long weekend rather than nearly a decade, and her father poured him a beer and picked up a conversation mid-sentence as though they'd just paused it. And Isabella sat at the table in her childhood home, watching this man fit back into the space her family had always kept for him, and felt something complicated shift beneath her breastbone. She didn't name it. She wasn't ready to name it. But she noticed it. She confronted him on a Wednesday evening on her balcony, 3 weeks after the walk. Not confronted, that wasn't quite right. She went looking for a fight because something in her needed to test him, needed to push back against the steady, warm, patient presence of him and see whether it would hold or crack. "You're doing this very carefully," she said. He looked up from the city below them. "Doing what?" "This." She gestured vaguely between them. "The texts, the Sunday dinners. You're being very strategic." "I'm not being strategic," he said. "I'm being consistent." "What's the difference?" "Strategy is about getting what you want," he said. "Consistency is about being who you say you are." She looked at him. "And who is that?" "Someone who isn't going to leave." She absorbed this. The night air was warm and smelled faintly of cedar. Below them, the city moved through its evening routines. "You moved your company here," she said. He nodded. "Your whole company." "To Austin." "Because of me." "Partly," he said. "Austin's also a good market for what we do. The talent pool is." "Mark." He met her eyes. "Yes," he said. "Because of you." She looked at him for a long moment. This was the thing she couldn't quite wrap her mind around. The sheer scale of the bet he'd made. He'd reorganized his entire professional infrastructure around the possibility of a woman who hadn't decided yet whether she was willing to trust him. "What if I say no?" she asked. "What if I decide I can't get past it? You've moved your whole life here and I might." "Then Austin will have been an excellent business decision," he said, "and I'll have learned to make better barbecue than anything in San Francisco, which is honestly not hard." Pause. "I'm not asking you to carry the weight of what I decided, Isabella. That's mine. What you decide is yours." He turned back to the city. Somewhere below, someone was playing music, a guitar, faint and intermittent in the warm air. "I'm scared," she said because it was true and she was tired of not saying true things. "I know," he said quietly. "I'm scared too." "You don't seem scared." "I'm terrified," he said. "I'm the most terrified I've been since I was 22 years old. The difference is that I'm not going to use it as a reason to disappear." She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything more. They stood on the balcony until the music stopped and she thought, "This is what I missed. Not the romance. Not the possibility of something more. The particular quiet of being with someone who doesn't need you to fill the silence." She went inside before she started crying. She wasn't ready for him to see that yet. The encounter with Damien happened on a Saturday afternoon in late October, outside a bookstore on South Congress. Isabella saw him first, his back to her, his arm around a woman with short dark hair, who was laughing at something he'd said. She had enough time to take stock of what she was feeling. A small, cold clench in the stomach, not grief exactly, more like the memory of grief. The reminder that something had ended even if the ending had been right. She was going to keep walking. She'd almost made it. "Isabella." His voice. She turned. Damien looked well. That was the thing about people who left. They so often looked well, as though the leaving had been good for them, which she supposed it had been, which was its own particular sting. He was smiling, slightly uncertain, the woman beside him now composed into careful neutrality. "Hey," Isabella said. "Hi." The conversation lasted 2 minutes. Small talk, the verbal equivalent of treading water. She heard herself responding, asking the appropriate questions, finding a smile from somewhere. The woman's name was Stephanie. They'd been together 7 months. Damien asked how Isabella was doing with the slightly excessive warmth of someone who felt guilty. "I'm good," she said. "I'm really good." She didn't know how true it was until she felt a hand settle lightly at the small of her back. She turned. Mark was there. She'd texted him earlier about meeting for coffee, hadn't thought about timing, looking at Damien with an expression that was entirely calm and entirely unreadable. Not hostile. Not performative. Just present. "Sorry I'm late," he said to her. Unhurried. He glanced at Damien. "Mark Calloway." He extended his hand with the ease of someone who'd walked into 100 rooms and decided the temperature of every one of them. "Damien," Damien said, shaking it. Something in his expression recalibrated as he looked between them. Good to meet you. Mark said it like he meant it, which was somehow more devastating than any other alternative would have been. They said their goodbyes. Isabella and Mark walked down the block and around the corner, and then she stopped and he stopped with her, and she pressed her fingers to her mouth for a moment because she needed a second. You okay? He asked. Yes. She lowered her hand. Yes, yeah. That was just. I know. I wasn't expecting. I know. He didn't try to fix it. He just stood with her on the sidewalk while she got her feet under her, and she thought, this is what it looks like. Someone who stays. She looked up at him. Something she'd been holding for a long time was loosening. She could feel it, like the first given a knot pulled too tight for too long. Can we not get coffee? She asked. We can do whatever you want, he said. I think I want to go home. Okay. You can come, she said. If you want to. He looked at her for a moment, reading whatever was in her face. I'll come, he said. They sat on her couch for a long time in the warm light of the evening, talking about nothing and everything, and at some point the talking tapered off and she was leaning against his shoulder, which had happened so gradually that she couldn't have said exactly when, only that it felt like something she'd done 1,000 times in a previous life. I blamed myself, she said. She wasn't sure why she said it now, except that it had been waiting in her chest for months, like something trying to get out. For you leaving. For Damien leaving. I kept thinking I was the common denominator. You're not, he said. I know. He did know. She'd worked at knowing it. But knowing it and feeling it are different things. He was quiet for a moment. When I think about the years I wasted, he said slowly, the thing I hate most isn't the time. It's the fact that you were doing that, blaming yourself, and I could have told you the truth at any point and didn't. His voice was even, but there was something underneath it. That's the part one can't fix. No, she said. You can't. I know. But you're here now. She said it almost to herself, testing the weight of it. You're actually here. He turned slightly so she could see his face. His eyes were exactly as she remembered, that particular quality of attention they had always held, the sense of seeing rather than just looking. I'm here, he said simply. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him. The 10 years were still there. She couldn't pretend they weren't, couldn't undo what they'd cost her, couldn't simply choose to trust because he'd said the right things. But underneath the years, underneath the scar tissue of his absence and Damien's leaving, and all the adjustments she'd made to herself to survive, something was still intact. Something that had been waiting in the dark, patiently, for this exact conversation. She kissed him. It was nothing like a movie kiss, not graceful or choreographed. It was tentative at first, almost a question, and then something shifted, and it became an answer to a question that had been sitting between them for 15 years, since before she knew what questions between people like them even meant. When she pulled back, his forehead came to rest against hers. I'm still not sure, she said quietly. I know. I'm not promising anything. I'm not asking you to. She pulled back enough to look at him properly. But I want to try, she said. I think I want to try. He exhaled, the smallest sound like something released. That's all I needed, he said. Outside, Austin moved through its evening, indifferent and eternal as the light in the room held them both. The weeks that followed were not a fairy tale. They were something better, they were real. They argued once about something so mundane she couldn't entirely remember the particulars later. Something about plans that got changed and communication that hadn't happened, and the specific frustration of two people learning each other's rhythms from scratch. She said something sharp. He went quiet in the particular way that meant he was deciding how to respond rather than reacting, which she found both admirable and maddening. And then he said, I think we're both tired and I think this conversation would go better tomorrow. And she'd said fine. And they'd talked tomorrow and it had gone better. He didn't disappear when it got hard. She noticed this. Filed it somewhere it mattered. She called her sister, who said, the guy who vanished for a decade? Are you serious? And then, after Isabella had explained, said, well, that's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard or a massive red flag, and I genuinely can't tell which. Which was, Isabella thought, probably the right response. Her father said nothing, but she caught him smiling at Thanksgiving in a way that was deeply self-satisfied, and she informed him that she saw him, and he arranged his face into innocence with the ease of long practice. Mark's company settled into its new Austin offices with a minimum of drama. She visited once, stood in the lobby looking at the open floor plan, and the exposed brick and the general evidence that he'd built something real from nothing, and felt a complicated pride that she'd never told him about. She told him about it eventually. He looked at her for a moment when she did. Then he said, "You know, the only person who ever told me I could actually do it was your dad. Boz. I always wanted you to see it." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Neither of them said anything for a while. Spring arrived with everything spring promises in Texas. The bluebonnets along the highway, the air that remembered how to be gentle, the particular quality of afternoon light that turns everything gold. Isabella had started to sleep through the night again, which she hadn't realized she'd stopped doing until she did. They were on her balcony on a Sunday morning when Mark said without any preamble, "I want to marry you. I know I said it in a terrible way the first time. I'm saying it properly now." He looked at her steadily. "Not soon. Whenever you're ready. But I want you to know that's where I'm headed. I'm not confused about it." She looked at him. The mockingbird was back on the railing. She'd named him Gerald months ago, a fact she had not shared with Mark and had no plans to. "I know," she said. "Is that an answer?" "It's a yes," she said. "When I'm ready, it's a yes." He nodded. He looked at his coffee cup. When he looked back up, there was something in his face she hadn't seen before. A kind of relief so deep it looked almost like grief, the expression of someone who had been carrying something for so long that setting it down felt strange. He said. "Okay," she agreed. They drank their coffee. Gerald watched them with the professional disinterest of a bird who had seen everything. The wedding was small. This had been non-negotiable. Isabella had no patience for performances, and Mark, who had spent years being the most visible person in any room, turned out to feel exactly the same. 23 people in her parents' backyard on a Saturday in June, lights strung in the oak trees, her mother's enchiladas, a cake from the bakery on 6th Street, that she'd been going to since she was 8 years old. She wore a dress that was simple and white and entirely her own, and she walked out to find Mark standing with her father under the oak tree. And the look on his face when he saw her was something she knew she would carry for the rest of her life. What she noticed, though, what she would remember, was the moment before the ceremony began. Her father put his hand on Mark's shoulder. A solid hand, the hand of a man who built things and fixed things, and showed up, and Mark looked at it and then at her father's face, and something crossed his expression that was too private for a public moment. A flash of something old and young at once, the boy who had needed exactly this, and the man who had worked so hard to be worthy of it. He blinked once. Steadied. She was close enough to see. She didn't look away. Her father said something quiet. She couldn't hear the words. And Mark nodded, and the hand stayed on his shoulder for a moment longer than strictly necessary. She thought, he's been waiting for that. Without knowing he was waiting for it. He's been waiting for someone to just be his. He thought, he has that now. He has us. The ceremony was short and earnest and entirely without performance. Mark said his vows looking only at her in the measured direct way he did everything, and she said hers looking back, and neither of them cried, which would have surprised people who didn't know them, but didn't surprise each other at all. Afterward, at some point in the golden last hour of the party, she found herself leaning against the fence with a glass of wine, watching him talk to her cousins with that easy confidence that still startled her sometimes, still required a moment of recalibration. This is the same person, that's the same person. She thought about the message. "I'm going to marry you." 4 words at 11:47 on a Wednesday, from a number she'd never deleted, catching her in the ordinary middle of an ordinary life. She thought he was drunk. She thought it was a mistake. She thought it was a terrible joke. She hadn't thought, this is the beginning of everything. But that's what it had been. Not a rescue, she hadn't needed rescuing and wouldn't have wanted it. Not a fairy tale ending, they were too old and too honest for that. Just a person who had finally figured out who he was, finding his way back to the person he'd always wanted to be with, and deciding that this time he wasn't going to be afraid of it. She raised her glass slightly in his direction, though he wasn't looking. He turned a moment later as though he'd felt it and looked at her across the yard, with that expression she'd never quite been able to name. Specific and steady and entirely hers. He thought, we wasted so much time. She thought, we have so much time left. She finished her wine and went back to her husband. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved this story, please share it with a friend or leave a like to support the channel. Don't forget to subscribe for your weekly dose of original audio romance. I'm Elena Maris, and I'll see you in the next story.